Imagine finding out your husband and your best friend have been sleeping together while you're 6 months pregnant with his child. I don't quite know how to begin this, so I'll just take you back to the start. When I first met Mark, I was barely out of my teens, and he was a few years older. We both started working entry-level jobs, trying to figure out adulthood. And what started as casual coffee dates slowly grew into something steady. There wasn't some big dramatic spark. It was more like a gentle flame that grew stronger the longer it burned. By the time I reached my mid-20s, we had married, built a home together, and welcomed 2 beautiful children. We loved lazy weekend morning with the kids piled into our bed, movie nights that always ended up with us sleeping on the couch, and long car rides where we talked about everything and nothing. The pace of our life was comfortable, anchored by our shared routines and the quiet assurance that we were in this together. About 2 years ago, my father was diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer. I'm so sorry to hear that. He's been my rock since my mother died when I was 12. He's the kind of father whose laugh could fill a room and whose hugs felt like being wrapped in a blanket of safety. There's something about the way he listens that makes you feel like every heavy thought you're carrying can be set down for a while. When the doctors told us that his treatments weren't working and spoke in terms of months, not years, my world dimmed. Watching someone who has always felt invincible start to forget familiar things, like asking where the dog he bought for me years ago came from, was heartbreaking. I spent a lot of afternoons holding back tears until I could cry in the car on the way home. Throughout all of this, Mark was exactly what I needed him to be. He held my hand in hospital waiting rooms, took over bedtime stories when my mind was somewhere else, and told me it was okay to focus on my dad and our kids. Such a good husband. He suggested that I quit my job so I could spend more time at home, and although I resisted at first, thinking I needed the distraction, he kept gently pushing until I finally resigned. A month later, we found out I was expecting again. I was shocked, overwhelmed, and nervous about juggling a pregnancy with my father's health. But Mark insisted that we could handle it. He said more than once that I should use this time to be with family and let him shoulder the financial stress. I believed him. And that is a partner. That is a partner right there. When one is going through hardship, the other is there to hold you up. There was another constant in my life, my best friend Sophie. Our mothers grew up together, and Sophie and I had known each other since before we could talk. She was the one I called from the hospital hallway when I heard of my father's prognosis. I drove straight to her house, and she let me sob into her sweatshirt for hours. She was the person I could send unflattering selfies to and talk with about absolutely anything. If soulmates existed in friendships, she was mine. Our families celebrated holidays together. Her parents treated me like another daughter. She called my dad uncle, and he adored her. We have pictures from every major moment in our lives together. Birthdays, graduations, weddings, thick as thieves, my mother used to say. That's why what happened next felt like the ground being pulled out from under me. Not long ago, in the dim light of early morning, our 3-year-old woke up with a fever. I shuffled between giving him medicine and watching cartoons, while Mark's alarms continued to ring in the bedroom. He works at a job where he sets multiple alarms, so I crept in to turn them off. He murmured something about working late and wanting to sleep in, rolled over, and drifted back to sleep. I picked up his phone to silence the remaining alarms, and a notification lit up the screen. It was from Sophie. The message said, in essence, that she assumed he hadn't told me about their relationship because she hadn't come home to an angry pregnant woman on her porch. My breath caught, my mind went blank, and the room felt like it shrank around me. My hands were shaking when I took the phone into the hallway and sat on the stairs. I opened their conversation and scrolled. What I saw was undeniable. Pictures I never wanted to see, and words I never imagined between them. Messages stretching back months, full of affection and memories they had made together while I was at prenatal appointments and hospital visits, caring for our children, or sitting with my father. It felt like a dagger in a place that I didn't know existed until it broke. For 4 months, my husband and my best friend had been seeing each other. For 4 months, the people that I trusted most had been lying to my face. And that wasn't the worst part. The worst part? There had been no obvious signs. Mark was still attentive. He still rubbed my back when I was nauseous, still sent me memes during the day, still asked about my dad. Sophie still came over for dinner, still played with my kids, still hugged me goodbye. They acted like nothing had changed because, in their mind, I guess, nothing had. I spent the next several hours just holding his phone, reading and rereading, feeling my heart pound in my throat. I kept checking the numbers to be sure. I looked for some explanation that made this something other than what it was. But there were explicit photos of her in his messages, and even a video I wish I could forget. The more I read, the more I realized that what I'd stumbled into was not a one-time mistake or a drunken misstep. It was a full-blown affair, fueled by secrecy and the thrill of betrayal. Can you imagine with your best friend that you feel is your sister? Oh, I felt sick, numb, furious, heartbroken, all of it at once. Yet, even then, as my world shattered, I still made breakfast for my kids and made sure their hair was brushed, because you still have to be a parent. I played with them on the living room floor and answered their questions about dinosaurs, because that's what mothers do. We keep moving even when our insides feel like they've been hollowed out. I know people will say you always see the warning signs, but in my case, I'm telling you, there were none. Mike had always been loving. That morning, he still kissed my forehead and told me to take a nap. Sophie had been at my side through every breakup, every heartbreak, every family gathering. She was the one who helped choose my wedding dress. She used to joke that Mark was like a big brother she never had. Ew. In their messages, she even referred to him that way. Ew. In between planning their next secret rendezvous, the hypocrisy made me want to scream. I knew I had to confront him. I also knew I couldn't do it that day. My father's health was hanging by a thread, and I was heavily pregnant, and my children deserved one more day of peace before I rocked the foundation of our home. So I gave myself 24 hours. I didn't call Sophie. I didn't send angry texts. I didn't show up at anyone's doorstep. I needed to gather my strength, plan my next move, and breathe for just a little longer before everything exploded. The next morning, after a sleepless night, I found clarity. There was no therapy that would unsee what I'd seen. He had broken his vows in the moments I needed him most, when my dad was dying and our family was expanding. It's easy to be faithful when life is comfortable. The hard times are when you see someone's true colors. Mark had shown me his, and they were not what I thought. I decided that staying with him out of fear of change would only breed resentment. I did not want to grow old beside someone I hated for what he'd done, nor did I want my children to grow up learning that love means accepting betrayal. I couldn't allow my kids to see me swallow my self-respect for the sake of appearances. I made a list, a long, detailed list. I tucked myself in the small office we'd set up in the corner of our house, telling Mark I was working on hospice arrangements for my father. I mean, that was partly true. I had phone calls to make about medical equipment and end-of-life care, but I also started calling lawyers. Before Mark woke up, I had already spoken with a few and sent initial emails explaining my situation. I transferred copies of messages and photos to an old email address I hadn't used since high school. I didn't trust myself to keep a straight face if he looked over my shoulder, so hiding everything felt safer. When he asked why I seemed distant, I blamed it on grief and pregnancy hormones, which, that was true. He rubbed my back, told me he understood, and went to work like it was just any other day. I called my former boss to explain that I might need to return sooner than planned. She told me the door was always open, but when I mentioned this to my lawyer, he advised me to hold off temporarily. There were too many variables, and I needed to be careful. We had signed a prenup, and Mark knew nothing about the inheritance my mother had left me before she passed. Oh my God. Thank you. I'd never touched that money, a gift to help my future family. Mark was generous but impulsive with spending. We'd also kept separate finances for that reason. He had his accounts and I had mine. He knew I had savings, but he never asked specifics and I never volunteered them. That inheritance had grown quietly over the years, and now I clung to the knowledge that it was mine alone. Our lawyer assured me that he couldn't touch it. Sometime that afternoon, while Mark was at work, I asked his mother, who I'll call Ruth, and Sophie's mother, Nancy, to meet me at my father's house. My children played outside with Nancy's son, Jake, who, over the years, had felt like a brother to me. In the living room, I handed Ruth and Nancy a stack of printed screenshots, careful to shield them from the more explicit ones. Okay, thank God. They sat in stunned silence as they read, their faces contorting with disbelief. Ruth kept whispering that she couldn't believe her son would do this, that she had raised him better. Nancy's eyes filled with tears. She kept shaking her head and apologizing even though she had done nothing wrong. She grew up knowing your mom. She knew how much you value family. I don't even know who she is anymore, Nancy said through sobs. We hugged and cried together until my throat felt raw. Hearing their anger and disappointment validated my own heartbreak. I wasn't crazy. What they had done was unimaginable. No, my dear, you're not crazy. Yes, what they did, I couldn't even imagine. Later that day, I sat across from my lawyer, a woman who looked at me with equal parts sympathy and steel. We went over finances, mortgage documents, savings account, and children's college funds. I had copies of wills from both my parents and Mark's. I explained that I wanted to move quickly but safely. She told me she would handle everything and that it was okay to feel angry. She also advised me to think about where to stay for a while, because once Mark knew I was leaving, being under the same roof might not be safe. I decided we would go to my father's cabin a few hours away. It was a place filled with memories of family barbecues and snowball fights, and more importantly, it was ours. I wouldn't have to worry about bumping into Mark in the hallway at night or him overhearing conversations with my lawyer. The next step was telling all the parents, Mark's and Sophie's, exactly what had been happening. I worried that they might hear about it through social media. Someone had already posted a summary of my story anonymously on a video platform, and I knew Mark would recognize the details if he saw it. With the lawyer's permission, we arranged a meeting the following day. Ruth and her husband Joseph, Nancy and her husband Robert, and Mark would be there. Sophie, whose own marriage was falling apart, because maybe instead of looking at somebody else's man, you should be focusing on your own, would be present too. Ruth promised to bring snacks. Nancy joked through the tears about making a slideshow of the text, but that's exactly what she ended up doing. We decided that while they confronted their children, I would not be there. I didn't have the capacity to watch the faces of two people I loved tear me to pieces with their own hands. Instead, I would be driving to the cabin with my kids, my father, and Jake. Being 7 months pregnant makes moving heavy bags difficult. Jake insisted on coming to help with the kids, making sure my dad's needs were met, and just to be there, in case Mark decided to show up unannounced. That evening, after the kids were asleep and Mark was still out, I went through the house taking note of everything I needed to pack. I emailed myself every piece of evidence, messages, photos, bank statements, and then deleted them from my phone. I printed out documents my lawyer might need and tucked them into a folder that I had hidden between novels on the bookshelf. My mind was racing. My body felt like it had been running a marathon. Still, I moved methodically. Children's clothes in one suitcase, toiletries in another, comfort items like their favorite stuffed animals and blankets in a bag by the door, all while Mark thought I was watching TV and crying because my father was sick. In truth, I was preparing to upend our life. As I went through gathering my strength, comments from strangers on the internet poured in, some telling me to forgive him, some telling me that all men cheat, that I should think about my children. Others begged me not to reconcile, to take revenge, to burn everything he owned. So, pause here. I really don't like when people say all men cheat. Not all men cheat, just like all women don't cheat. Weak people cheat. That's who cheats. So you could say All weak people cheat. I tried not to let any of this sway me. My barometer was the love my parents had shared. They were married for 20 years, and after my mom died, my dad never so much as looked at another woman. Their devotion taught me that fidelity is not some unattainable fairy tale. It's basic respect. I knew I couldn't settle for less. Not now, not ever. Message! The day of the meeting, Jake stayed with me while I packed. He kept my kids entertained by playing video games and letting them help with chores. At one point, he quietly admitted that he'd had feelings for me when we were teenagers. Nope, now is not the time. Now is not the time. But he also knew I was married and that now was not the time to think about anything other than survival. Okay, thank you. I'm here as your friend, nothing more, he said, and I believed him. It was a strange comfort to know someone's heart held space for me in a different way, but I couldn't process it. There was no room inside me for romance, not when grief, betrayal, and anger were already taking up so much space. Meanwhile, the tension in the air felt electric. Mark kissed me goodbye before leaving for the meeting, completely unaware of what awaited him. His parents and Nancy and Robert gathered in Nancy's living room with her laptop hooked up to the TV. They started with the gentler texts, where Sophie and Mark flirted and planned gym meetups, and quickly progressed to the explicit ones. As each message appeared on the screen, Nancy and Ruth watched their children's faces flush with guilt and shame. When it became clear that they couldn't deny it, Mark tried to grab Sophie's phone, and Joseph held him back. Sophie began to cry, begging her parents for forgiveness. Robert looked at his daughter and said calmly, but with a tremor in his voice, that he no longer considered her his daughter. Damn, that's kind of harsh, huh? For someone who had been a daddy's girl her whole life, those words cut deep. Nancy told her she had to move out. Ruth told Mark that he had lost the sun in his eyes and that his actions were unforgivable. The confrontation lasted less than an hour, but the damage it caused has no timeline. While all of that unfolded, I was driving to the city with boxes in the trunk and the kids singing along to their favorite songs in the back seat. My father, who was sleepy from pain medication, hummed along softly. I kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, thinking about the days I had sat in the passenger seat while he drove, teaching me about life, patience, kindness. Now I was the one driving him away from the wreckage of my own marriage. Later, from the security of the cabin, Ruth called to tell me what had happened. Mark had driven home, discovered half of the furniture and most of the children's clothing missing, and lost his temper. She could hear him through the phone screaming, throwing things, punching holes in the drywall. Then he went to my father's house and tried to break down the front door with a baseball bat. You would do that while her father is on his deathbed? You don't know if they're in his house and that's what you're going to do? A neighbor called the police. Mark was arrested for vandalism and disorderly conduct. Ruth and Joseph refused to bail him out. They told him he needed to face the consequences of his actions. Sophie tried to call me. Oh, female dog, look. She left voicemail after voicemail apologizing, crying, sometimes angry, sometimes pitiful. Weren't you the one saying, oh, I guess you haven't told her because an angry pregnant lady isn't on my doorstep. Weren't you waiting for this moment? You didn't care. She blamed me for stealing her soulmate. Are you frickin' kidding me? Said Mark only stayed with me for the kids. Claimed she had been the real love of his life. If you don't get off my phone. Hearing that might have destroyed me once. Now, it made me realize how delusional she was. I didn't respond. My lawyer advised me to keep every message. She said sometimes people reveal more when they think you aren't listening. In the midst of all this chaos, I scheduled an appointment with my doctor. Being pregnant means any emotional upheaval can feel amplified, and I wanted to ensure my baby was safe. I asked for every possible test to screen for infections. Yeah, I didn't even think about that throughout all of this. Just in case. Every result that came back was negative, though some would take weeks. It was one of those things that I could check off a list of worries. I also continued preparing for what was to come. I broke into our home office to retrieve Mark's financial documents. He stored them in a lockbox, but I knew where he kept the key. I photocopied everything, tax returns, retirement accounts, his wills, every policy and account related to the kids. I handed it all over to my lawyer, who seemed impressed by my thoroughness. She gently reminded me that it was okay to rest, but planning made me feel in control. Some nights, after the children were asleep and the cabin was quiet except for my father's breathing, I would allow myself to collapse. I cried in the shower until the hot water ran cold, feeling equal parts relieved and devastated. I didn't want vengeance. I wanted a life free from lying, from secretly checking his phone, from wondering where he really was when he said he was working. I wanted to wake up one day and not feel this heavy weight on my chest. A few days later, I received an email from Mark. He had somehow found the anonymous video online and recognized our story. He asked if I was divorcing him. I said yes, and he said he was sorry he lost his temper and asked if there was a chance we could reconcile. I told him there wasn't. We discussed the children. He insisted he loved them and wanted to see them. I told him he could, but only under supervision. He surprisingly agreed. I think that the shock of losing his parents' support sobered him, well, for now at least. My father's health continued to decline. He was admitted to the hospital and stayed there with no release date in sight. I spent as many hours as I could by his bedside, holding his hand, telling him stories about the kids, reminding him of old memories. Sometimes he would wake up, see my swollen belly, and smile with tears in his eyes. Other times he would confuse me for someone else or forget why he was there in the first place. Those days hurt the most. Meanwhile, my children were adjusting to the change better than I expected. I had scheduled therapy for them because I didn't want them bottling up their feelings they couldn't understand. My oldest asked more questions than the younger one, wanting to know why we were at Grandpa's cabin and why Daddy wouldn't come. I explained in the simplest way I could that Mommy and Daddy weren't getting along right now and that sometimes adults needed space to figure things out. I promised them that they were loved, that none of this was their fault, and that I would always be honest with them. I saved the heavier explanations for our therapist's office, where a professional could help me navigate their reactions. I received messages from strangers around the world. Some said I was strong, others called me foolish. Who cares? Friends I hadn't heard from in years reached out with support. A few people told me to stay, that most of the marriage was good, and that it outweighed the betrayal. But I knew my worth. I refused to let this break me or make me cynical about love. My father's love for my mother showed me what devotion looks like. I may not be ready to think about dating for a long time, if ever, but I refuse to believe all men cheat. That narrative only serves to keep people in unhappy relationships. Through all of this, Jake remains a constant help. He used his vacation time to stay with us at the cabin. In the evenings, after the kids were tucked in and my father was asleep, he and I would sit on the porch. Sometimes we talked, other times we played video games to clear our heads. One night, he revisited his confession about him holding feelings for me since we were teenagers. He again reminded me that he didn't expect anything from me, but he just wanted to say it out loud again, and that he would be my friend no matter what. I was touched, but I was also numb, and I told him my heart felt like a burned-out house, and he said he understood. We left it at that. As the days turned into weeks, Mark oscillated between begging and threatening. He called me names one moment and then sent long messages about missing my laugh the next. Like, I don't understand. You're the one who did something terrible, horrible, and no good in your marriage. How are you calling the person names? I don't get when people do that. He claimed Sophie wasn't the only one. He threatened to call the police and accuse me of kidnapping for taking the kids. He accused me of hiding money. Then he would pivot, saying he would do anything to fix things. Look, which one is it? It was exhausting and predictable. My lawyer told me to document everything. I stopped reading his messages as soon as they veered into insults. I decided I couldn't share custody 50-50 with someone so volatile. Initially, I had thought I would. We'd both been good parents, even if he'd been a lousy husband. But after his arrest and his outbursts, I knew I had to protect my children. I planned to pursue full custody. Eventually, news traveled fast in our small circle. Sophie was completely cut off by her parents. They stopped paying for her divorce lawyer and told her she wasn't welcome at family gatherings. I think that's a bit much, in my opinion. Am I wrong? I think that's a bit much. She tried to blame me, saying I turned everyone against her. No, ma'am. No, ma'am. You did that yourself. The truth was, her own actions had. She tried to reach out, claiming that Mark was using me for the kids and that she had been manipulated by him. Again, no, ma'am. I blocked her on everything except for one line my lawyer monitored, just in case she revealed anything useful. Life became a strange balance of heaviness and mundane tasks. Between hospital visits and therapy appointments, there were soccer tryouts and spelling tests, ultrasound appointments and bedtime stories. My kids still laughed and made fart jokes. They still asked for more syrup on their pancakes. My father still asked me if I remember the time he let me drive his truck down a dirt road at 13 and how I nearly hit a fence. In those moments, I remembered that joy can exist alongside pain. One day, my eldest came running into the living room with a huge grin, shouting about making the traveling soccer team. I hugged him and cheered, tears springing into my eyes, not just because I was proud, but because I felt like a piece of normal life peeking through the rubble. Those small moments kept me anchored. People online continued to follow the story, asking for updates, offering advice or judgment. Sometimes the comments overwhelmed me. Other times, they felt like little waves of support. I wasn't ready to share every detail, but I felt compelled to let those who cared know that we were still hanging on. As I write this now, there's still no resolution. My father remains in the hospital, and his condition isn't improving. The lawyers are still working through paperwork. Mark has started court-mandated therapy and sees the kids under supervision at a family center. My children have both good days and hard ones. There are mornings I wake up feeling light and mornings I wake up with a weight on my chest. There are nights I cry in the shower and nights I fall asleep scrolling through photos of my mother, trying to remember how she handled hardships with such grace. I don't know what comes next, but what I do know is that leaving a marriage is not just about two people. It ripples through families, friendships, and daily routines. It's messy and painful, but I also know that staying in a marriage where I'm disrespected and lied to would be far worse. I owe myself peace, and I owe my children the example of a mother who chose self-respect. So for now, we take it one day at a time. We lean on Ruth and Nancy, who have become my pillars, offering to watch the kids when I need a break or cooking dinner when I'm too tired. We make plans with my father when he has the strength, watching his favorite movies or reminiscing about fishing trips. We laugh when we can, cry when we need to, and focus on healing. This story isn't over. There are court dates ahead, conversations to be had, therapists to attend, hearts to mend. But the chapters we've lived so far have taught me that sometimes the hardest storms reveal your own resilience. And sometimes the love that sustains you comes from unexpected places. From a mother-in-law who chooses you over her son. From a friend who shows up with a casserole and a listening ear. From a community of strangers online who send messages of strength. This is where we are right now, somewhere in the middle of upheaval and recovery, grief and hope. We're still standing, still fighting for our peace, and still choosing what comes next. And when the next chapter unfolds, I promise that I'll be here to tell you how it went. All right, so here's the truth. You can't fix people who chose to break you. You can't save someone who already decided you're disposable. What do you do when the person who's supposed to protect your heart is the one person who destroys it? People will say, but you have the kids, he's sorry, but maybe it was a mistake. No, there's a difference between a mistake and a pattern. A mistake is tripping. A pattern is dancing on your pain like it's a stage. When someone cheats on you, especially with the person you trusted most, that's not a slip-up. That's a decision. And when they look you in the face and pretend nothing's wrong while you're falling apart, well, that's just plain cruelty. So here's what I'll tell you. Stop waiting for closure. You already have it. The message, the pictures, the lies, that is your closure. They showed you who they are. Believe it. At the end of the day, the best revenge isn't about exposing the person or even hurting the person back. It's about rebuilding your life so beautifully that they have to live knowing that they don't have access to it anymore. You don't owe them tears. You don't owe them closure. You owe yourself a new beginning. So take it. And like I always say, don't look back. Remember that these stories are based on true events. Name, dates, locations, and certain scenarios may have been changed to protect the OP. Thanks for listening. I hope this story helped somebody out there, and I'll see you in the next one.